Hey, sports fans and fans of kids in general not having cancer, and to those who are starting to realize what a fake world of plastic cancer we live in. Saw this article and thought it might be important. NBC News: How safe is the artificial turf your child plays on? And it gets into how they use crumb turf after years of using Astroturf made of little crumbs inside the fake grass in all these sports stadiums that are all across the country in professional, amateur, and all the in between levels of sports playing, kids' teams, universities, schools, you name it, that is made up of little crumbs from synthetic, artificial tire materials and other things, and it's loaded with benzene and other cancer causing, what they believe could be cancer causing materials. There's lead, but they don't know if it's cancer causing because no research has yet linked cancer to artificial turf, so they claim. But here we are in this article, and it's got all these sympathetic and heart wrenching stories about little kids with cancer who, I guess, played soccer all their life since they were little girls, and then they wound up with things like non Hodgkin's lymphoma and other forms of cancer. This lady here went to visit him in the hospital and said, "Don't tell me you're another one of those goalies." And she names some 34 goalies she knows who have cancer, who took a lot of dives into this synthetic dirt, had these little synthetic tire particles thrown up into the air, gone into their skin, into their perspiration, into their mucous membranes, their eyeballs. They swallowed them. They went into their cuts. They inhaled dust particles from them. And his dedicated athletes spent countless hours diving into this artificial turf to practice. But now they've battled through cancer, and it's just really makes you want to scream when you see these cases. And I mean, obviously, this is a sad story. Why should someone who's spent so much effort trying to play a game be facing this kind of battle at such a young age? But the article gets even more infuriating when you read into the details. The girls that they profiled talk about the turf bugs. That's the little flakes of crumb rubber turf that flew up as they played the game week after week, day after day in their drills and their practices and their games. And talk about how they would come home from school with them. They'd be caught in their hair, how they swallowed hundreds of them per year, and how basically this stuff got all over them, their lives, their skin, their clothing, their homes, etc. And yet they tell you these things are safe, just like they tell you all the stuff in the food, the water, the air, the materials you use in your homes, your cars, incidental materials, that all that stuff is safe too. And here's quotes from the Synthetic Turf Council, because that exists in everything, an industry group for the synthetic turf industry, saying how safe it is and saying how the evidence collected so far makes it seem like it's safe. We've got 14 studies on our website that says there's no health effects that are negative at all. So just forget about your cancer stories. It can't be linked to our turf, even though that's what it's being linked to in this story. They cite the EPA and the EPA of California, various branches from New York City, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission to tell them how safe it is too. That's here on the Synthetic Turf Council frequently asked questions about whether or not this stuff is safe and should you be concerned. They say, dubiously I might add, that more than 75 independent and credible studies from groups like the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Division, the EPA, and these agencies in New York and California all say it's safe. Or at least they say that they have validated it as safe, and then they link to a more detailed page with maybe a dozen studies or so on it, linked to these agencies they talk about. But what they don't link to is stuff like this. The CDC, Centers for Disease Control, referring to a New Jersey Department of Health study on these types of artificial turfs having very high levels of lead dust and potentially unhealthy levels of lead. Well, maybe that's why they've got cancer. Then again, maybe it isn't, but it doesn't exactly give me the impression that this stuff is safe, and it doesn't make me feel very good that some industry council is telling us how safe it is and stacking the deck with all their positive, wishy-washy, neutral, asking the wrong questions, throwing in red herring studies from all these bought-off, corrupt agencies, while there clearly is reason to doubt this stuff and ask further questions. Here's this study from the Journal of Toxicology and Environmental Health investigating just the benzothiazole part of the synthetic turfs, pretty much a known toxin because it's from the benzene group, and found it was linked to human bladder cancer, that it was a rodent carcinogen, that BZT toxicity values had an acute air and respiratory irritant component that was toxic, a dermal sensitizer, meaning people's skins were allergic to it, and they also found that it was mutagenic and that it was breaking apart the benzene rings and interacting with people's DNA and cells and so forth, that there's an issue with formaldehyde, and that this doesn't even get into the lead part of it. And that's just absolutely scratching the surface. There's a lot of studies on this stuff, but you don't see them listed over here at the Synthetic Turf Council, and you see it all packed into details and sentimental stories in this NBC story without getting into the admitted known fact that of course it could be toxic, of course it could be linked to cancer. Benzene by itself is a known human carcinogen, but hey, here's the Astroturf interest group lobbying and corporate strategy, who basically have a bear hug policy to go and cozy up to the lobbyists and their counter lobbyists and the groups that could help them with, quote, self-regulation and, special interest groups and I don't know. It just goes on. It's just very typical because you look into the MSG stuff. They've got industry groups to promote how great MSG is and how it's safe in foods. You look into carrageenan, the food additive that's used in organic foods. They've got a council to tell you how great and wonderful it is. When are we going to wise up to the fact that these industry groups don't care about this coach or these girls who have cancer? They don't care about your wife. They don't care about your family. They don't care what's going to happen to you decades down the road. Obviously, they only care about the short-term financial interest of their shareholders because they're an industry, a corporation, and they're going to smooth it over and make it sound all safe, while these kids want to know why they're dying, why they're sick, why their mothers are upset, of why they've been breathing this stuff in for years, but instead of curbing it, instead of using real grass or finding something that's actually safe, they just keep saying it's an extremely low risk. There's a potential risk, maybe, but there's so many benefits. It helps the environment. It saves water. It helps with the upkeep. It cushions athletes when they dive into the rubber. But I guess somehow that makes it worth it if they breathe in benzene, lead, and other things that are in the crumb rubber from recycled tires. Come on, people. I feel really bad for these girls, and I really am just fed up with the attitude from our federal agencies and these industry groups being so arrogant and dismissive of what's happening to people's lives.